thanks a million, everybody, for being here, and thanks for that very kind, extraordinarily generous introduction. I'm going to talk. I'm really going to do three things. The title of the talk is. Actually, I'm pressing the right button here. The title of the talk is Art, Northern Ireland, and the Ideology of Well-Being. What are the politics of happiness? And even in the context of giving one of the quick talks that we're doing this evening, I want to slowly wind my way around to the main subject of the title. I'll probably read most of this just to try and slow me down. I had too much coffee today. I tend not to drink coffee, and so I'm a little bit like Gene Wilder and the producers. I'm going to start, screaming and ranting if I don't stick to the text. So I will try and look up once in a while. But what I want to do is firstly say something about the book which Eddie mentioned, which came out last year. And then I want to talk for a moment about a recent cultural and urban planning project in Derry, which has an emphasis on well-being at its centre, which is one of the things that I've referred to in my title. And lastly, I want to ask a question about the use of this vocabulary of happiness and well-being and so on, and practices employed in relation to it at this moment in time. So these questions and this material is being presented really at the end of one stage of research, the completion of a book, which I'm trying to move on from, I suppose, and therefore at the beginning of another. So it's asked, these things are presented and asked in a spirit of curiosity and uncertainty, rather than from any kind of critical clarity and commitment, which may or may not be appropriate to this occasion, but hopefully it'll make enough sense to be just about okay. So to begin then, in 2017 then I published this book, Ghost Haunted Land, Contemporary Art in Post-Troubles Northern Ireland. The book began, unsurprisingly, from local concerns, principally the development in Northern Ireland's contemporary art in the years since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Obviously, it was concerned with regional political developments too, and with a range of evident changes in the society and culture of Northern Ireland during that period. And in covering this recent Northern Irish history, this history of art and politics, it left a lot out in ways that still trouble me, so that's partly partly that sets up questions for something else perhaps that comes next. But the book also sought to address connections with wider issues, broader contexts. I wanted to reflect on how developments in art from Northern Ireland related to changes in art internationally, and the emergence and eventual dominance of certain art forms and practices. Among them, things like installation art, and the use of large-scale photographic reproduction, the rise of relational aesthetics, the increasingly significant role of the creative curator, a bunch of things that are now standard within contemporary art practices, but that may not necessarily have been to the same extent in the 1990s. And in addition then, the book reflected on how political developments in Northern Ireland related to an expanded sphere of history and politics. I tried, as others such as Aaron Kelly and Daniel Dewsbury have done, to ask how cultural and political shifts in Northern Ireland, the peace process, its post-agreement aftermath, have been influenced by such things as cultural and economic globalisation and the policies and agendas of neoliberal governments. This is, I think, crucial to the post-conflict predicament in Northern Ireland, and I'll perhaps come back to this in a moment or two. But as Aaron Kelly has written in relation to this, with reference to the rapidly changing landscape of Belfast, he says, "It's noteworthy that the current storm we call progress in the north seeks to assure us not merely that it demarcates a development, but also that it is inevitable. The quartering of Belfast, its mutating skyline, and increasingly globalised space all implore us that this progress, which purportedly is for the benefit of everyone, is fated and inexorable as the progressive alternative to conflict. But this alternative is a remedy that serves to deny alternatives to anything but itself. Such a position typifies the hegemony of neoliberal economics in this multinational moment. The belief that the market proffers not merely the most preferable way to order a society, but the only one. This is written a good few years ago now, but aspects of it are still relevant, and they were influential in the formation of the arguments in the book. So, a central aspiration of the book Ghost Haunted Land then was to highlight a selection of works which gave some sense of the global and local uncertainties of the era, acknowledging change perhaps, but often in ways that evince deep anxiety as well as new possibility, and that spoke to local conditions as well as signalling the effects of external forces. One of the book's interests in this regard was in artworks that attempted to explore or stage what we might think of as shared spaces, real or imagined physical or cultural situations of unconventional gathering or social connection, looking at how artists were speculating about how non-sectarian social bonds might be formed or maintained in this notionally post-conflict society. So in that regard, at different moments, I talked about sometimes pretty minor, sometimes barely remembered artworks by artists such as Susan Phillips, placing projects in bus stations here where she sang things like Radiohead songs to baffled people waiting for buses, or Miriam de Burka, again another not especially well-known film called Dogs Have No Religion, work that took taxi tours in Belfast and heard strange stories not in official history books. Works like this intervened in or recalled social situations where priorities beyond those of troubled politics prevailed. In this instance, the Greyhound track, where, as a speaker in this film says, dogs had no religion. So I also discussed projects such as The Vacuum, an ongoing social intervention, perhaps, that sought to promote through publishing ideas about alternative histories and identities in Belfast. And I highlighted other projects, such as one called The Soft Estate by Philip Napier and Mike Hogg, which partially drew its content from the annually updated Mosaic Northern Ireland, a consumer classification system used as a resource by public officials and political representatives in Northern Ireland, a way of defining identities in contemporary Northern Ireland used both by companies and government departments that replaced sectarian stereotypes with consumer lifestyle categories. So, in the post-agreement period then, some artists have made tentative propositions about alternative types of connection, coexistence and solidarity, while others have noted how the deterritorialising forces of capitalism undo fixed identities too. Since writing this book then, I'm wondering what the hell to do next. I've been interested in reflecting on other types of shared space, or other situations of shared space, and other ways in which non-orthodox models of social coexistence are advanced. Reading, for instance, Stuart Bailey's Trouble Songs recently, which I'm sure some of you have, has been a pleasure in this regard, celebrating the diversity of subcultures that were sustained in the north of Ireland during the Troubles years. It's a really enjoyable book, but I think it says a lot that we could do more with. But recently, with these questions of shared space in mind, I came across a rather extraordinary story that some of you might be familiar with, a story about a character called Dobby Dick. This was completely new to me. You may not have heard of this cult figure from the history of the Troubles, and if not, you might be surprised to learn that Dobby Dick was a killer whale. This was the name given to a rogue orca that followed a shoal of salmon up the River Foyle in Derry and became caught between sandbanks, and so was unable for a while to find its way to the sea. The plight of this struggling animal, spectacularly visible at times from the city's bridges, became, in 1977, a subject of discussion and excitement in Derry, temporarily becoming an alternative, entirely unexpected focus of conversation across the city. It's strange, perhaps, to think of this killer creature becoming a miraculous guest in the troubled city. It appeared and disappeared, giving fascinating glimpses of something other, alien, amazing. As a contemporary news report stated, one effect of Dobby Dick's visit was that kids began to draw him in school instead of more familiar militarised scenes of ordinary urban life. I feel quite sort of romantically excited talking about this whale for some reason. But it's a rather bizarre, beautiful moment in Derry's history, a brief diversion from the insistent preoccupations of the Troubles, to some degree at least. And maybe too, the memory of this out-of-place creature has value for us today as a fascinating, fleeting figure of unpredictable possibility, something endangered and hard to deal with, but real and revelatory. You should probably know that Dobby Dick left the Derry waters safely, escaping back to the sea, and apparently is still alive out there somewhere today, has been recently spotted. So the reason for that this story came to my attention was that it has been a primary inspiration for a major new cultural project in Derry. And this is really getting towards the last bit here. The Future Foyle scheme. This is an urban planning and development initiative which has been established in an attempt to find alternative ways for the population of Derry to engage with the river and its environs. Future Foyle has emerged in part out of the need to address the terrible suicide problem in Northern Ireland, as a recent Guardian report on the initiative explained. This is quoting from the Guardian. Northern Ireland has the highest suicide rate in the UK. In Derry, the charity Foyle Search and Rescue was established in response almost 25 years ago. It was established almost 25 years ago in response to the number of lives lost to suicide in the river. It assisted in more than 230 incidents in 2016 alone. It's a huge, frightening number. A recent spike in incidents on the river has contributed to pressure to respond by the city. And so this project, developed in partnership with the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design at the Royal College of Art, is proposing that innovative urban design projects can help improve mental health and well-being in the city. The project's plans involve sophisticated design and technological approaches to make the riverbanks and bridges more amenable for social interaction, imagining these areas anew as shared spaces. The project has many components, from sculptures to permanent design interventions, and pod structures that can be used by businesses and community groups to provide services and supports for members of the Derry community. The hope is that through such design strategies, these areas will become stimulating shared spaces. There's undoubtedly a great deal to commend in this initiative, and it's drawn substantially and successfully on a range of contributions from community groups and individuals. In reading about this ambitious project, however, I'm brought back to some of the concerns at the core of my book. Those anxieties about how such local interventions might relate to broader political and cultural shifts. And it's notable in this regard how our Future Foyle, as a project, in its accompanying statements, is described in terms which echo wider shifts and emphases within contemporary so-called creative economies. And we can remember how slippery and sly and ubiquitous the word creative has become in government propaganda, perhaps. The Future Foyle venture is, we are told, a transformative, innovative cultural and health intervention. It aims to improve the health and social well-being of everyone using the riverfront. This is quoting from the accompanying text, through rejuvenation and animation of the banks and bridges as a shared positive space. So this interest in and commitment to the concept of shared space is encouraging. But as writers such as Lynn Segal and Will Davies have recently noted, there's an often under-acknowledged political undercurrent to the current discourse of well-being. For Davies, writing in his book The Happiness Industry, terms such as well-being and indeed happiness itself are now central to corporate and governmental discourse. Companies employ happiness consultants. Smartphones and social media technologies monitor our health and well-being through apps. In many companies today, happiness is coercive, its levels routinely measured. This is from an artwork by the Finnish artist Pilvi Takala, where she posed as a happiness consultant and got employed by a company to go around stroking the members of staff. Some of them, as you can see, duck away while others appreciate the little bit of sensitive tactility. So these strategies then, these sort of strategies of well-being and so on, are applied in an era when labour is ever more precarious, when public services are pared to the bone, when housing is unaffordable or inaccessible, and education can imply a lifetime of debt. The rise of well-being policies coincides with, and has involved in dialectical relation to, an epidemic of depression and a routinisation of the medicalised treatment for such conditions, a pathologising of what may be social problems. The Future Foyle project certainly takes account of questions of education, accommodation and labour. And though the commitment to designing situations of shared space that are socially beneficial is very welcome, it seems worth asking how this plan relates to the broader interests of what Lynn Segal calls an official happiness agenda. Since Tony Blair's New Labour government, there has been official government interest continued by David Cameron and others in measuring happiness during an era when many of the core components of a shared public space have been gradually and deliberately stripped away. The UK, it's worth noting, comes pretty low in international happiness rankings. Lynn Segal's provocative view, which merits more than lightning-quick coverage here, is that we need to resist the happiness imperative beamed down on us from every other billboard or packaged in 1,000 self-help manuals. Maybe something like Future Foyle will, like the wonderful history of Dobby Dick, bring people together in better, more surprising ways. Let's hope so. But we should keep asking and hope that creative work, artistic work perhaps, will also keep asking what it means to create or inhabit shared spaces today, especially in the forever complex context of post-conflict Northern Ireland. As Segal argues, situations of bringing people together can only endure when there is space for the recognition of a plurality of differences, which, in consciously combating the hierarchies of privilege and power consolidated around difference, create spaces of excitement, respect, and hope. I'll leave it there. Great. Thanks very much.